Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The information provided in this video is for educational, historical, and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute professional legal advice, financial advice, or counseling. Family law is highly complex, constantly evolving, and varies drastically from state to state and even county to county. The historical trends, case studies, and business models discussed throughout this masterclass, including specific legal document preparation services or the shifting cultural dynamics of divorce in the United States, are meant to provide a broader sociological and systemic perspective. If you are currently navigating a divorce, legal separation, child custody dispute, or any other family law matter, it is absolutely critical that you consult with a qualified, licensed attorney in your specific jurisdiction to understand your rights, obligations, and potential outcomes. Relying on internet content to make binding legal decisions carries significant risk, and we urge every viewer to conduct their own due diligence and seek localized professional counsel before taking any action. There is a multi-billion-dollar industry built entirely on the premise that your worst day should also be your most expensive. For decades, the American cultural narrative surrounding divorce has been heavily scripted by a legal establishment that thrives on conflict and escalation. We have been conditioned to believe that the dissolution of a marriage must inherently be a scorched earth battle, a grueling war of attrition waged in oak-paneled courtrooms, billed at $400 an hour in 6-minute increments. But right now, beneath the surface of mainstream legal reporting, a massive cultural rebellion is quietly dismantling that system. To understand this, we have to look at a phenomenon, a model that has become synonymous with this shift, often encapsulated by the rise of streamlined legal support operations and business models like Divorce 661. This is not just a conversation about a specific legal document preparation service operating out of Southern California. It represents the tip of the spear in a nationwide paradigm shift regarding how Americans handle the dissolution of their unions. Consider the reality that the average litigated divorce in the United States costs roughly $15,000 to $30,000 per person. In high-conflict states or complex asset scenarios, that number easily spirals into the hundreds of thousands, wiping out college funds, home equity, and generational wealth in a matter of months. This massive wealth transfer from the American middle class to the family law industrial complex has been completely normalized by society. We watch cultural touchstones like Marriage Story or The War of the Roses, and accept that absolute financial and emotional destruction is simply the unavoidable cost of ending a legal contract. But what happens when the public realizes the game is rigged? What happens when a generation burdened by economic instability looks at the traditional retainer model and simply says no? They circumvent the system entirely. This video exposes the anatomy of that circumvention. We are going to unpack how the quiet rise of paralegal intervention, self-representation, and procedural decoupling is sending shockwaves through traditional law firms. We will look at the exact mechanisms that keep people trapped in endless litigation, the hidden financial incentives of the family court system, and how the cultural evolution of the American family is forcing the legal system to adapt or face irrelevance. If you have ever wondered why getting divorced in America feels like a punishment rather than a transition, or if you want to understand the exact economic forces driving the future of marriage dissolution, you cannot afford to miss what we are about to reveal. The traditional legal gatekeepers do not want you to understand this transition, because the moment the public fully embraces this cultural evolution, the litigation-first model collapses. Today, we are going to fundamentally change how you view the legal mechanics of personal relationships in the United States. We are diving incredibly deep into the historical trends that brought us to this exact moment in American cultural evolution, and we are going to solve a massive informational deficit. For too long, the American public has been deliberately kept in the dark regarding the administrative realities of family law. The primary problem this masterclass solves for you right now is the problem of systemic ignorance and engineered dependency. You will no longer view divorce as an unpredictable lightning strike of financial ruin, but rather as a highly structured administrative process that has been artificially inflated by a culture of conflict. We will break down specific case studies demonstrating how the unbundling of legal services has democratized access to the courts and provided a lifeline to families who would otherwise be financially devastated. We are going to map out the exact historical timeline of how the United States transitioned from a draconian, fault-based divorce culture, where individuals literally had to prove adultery, extreme cruelty, or abandonment just to be granted permission to exit a marriage, to the no-fault revolution initiated by California in 1969, and finally, to the modern era of procedural autonomy that we are experiencing today. But we will not stop at a mere historical review. We are going to meticulously deconstruct the current landscape, examining how alternative document preparation models represent a profound rejection of paternalistic legal oversight. The cultural shift here cannot be overstated. Historically, the state and the retained attorney acted as the ultimate arbiters of a family's destiny. The lawyer was viewed as an indispensable gladiator required for survival. Today, the cultural shift is moving rapidly and aggressively towards self-determination. People are recognizing a fundamental truth. If two adults can sit down and agree on the division of their mutual assets, the equitable allocation of their debts, and the co-parenting schedules for their children, the actual legal dissolution of the marriage is merely a matter of correct paperwork, formatting, and strict procedural compliance. We will meticulously examine the psychology of the modern consumer, who utilizes these alternative legal models instead of retaining an attorney. We will analyze the macro-level socioeconomic factors driving this shift, particularly focusing on how the shrinking American middle class can no longer sustain the exorbitant luxury of traditional, open-ended litigation. Furthermore, we will explore the stark operational realities of the court system itself, family courts that are so severely backlogged, underfunded, and overwhelmed that they are fundamentally incapable of providing the swift, equitable justice they advertise. By understanding these broader historical trends and systemic failures, you will gain a comprehensive understanding of why the do-it-yourself and paralegal-assisted legal movements are not just passing fads born of the internet age, but permanent structural restructurings of the American legal landscape. We will look closely at data indicating the massive year-over-year increase in pro per, or self-represented, filings across major metropolitan jurisdictions. We will dissect the fierce institutional resistance from local bar associations and the complex ethical debates surrounding the unauthorized practice of law, analyzing how these regulations are frequently weaponized to protect the lucrative monopoly of licensed attorneys. This masterclass is designed specifically to arm you with a panoramic, uncompromising understanding of this hidden industry. Whether you are actively studying law, analyzing cultural sociology, or simply trying to understand the economic undercurrents that dictate the life cycle of the American family unit, the in-depth insights provided here will be entirely transformative. You are going to learn exactly how to identify the deliberate friction points embedded within traditional legal processes, and how innovative consumer-first models are bypassing those exact frictions to save consumers millions of dollars collectively. We will leave absolutely no stone unturned, analyzing everything from the initial intake procedures of modern document preparation services to the complex final submission of judgment packets, rigorously contrasting every single step with the bloated, archaic, and needlessly combative methods of the past. Prepare to have your entire perspective reframed as we embark on this comprehensive exploration of the fascinating intersection between marriage, money, and the ongoing evolution of modern American autonomy. Let us step directly into the reality of the year 2026 and examine a hypothetical case study that perfectly illustrates the systemic failure and the resulting cultural evolution. Imagine a couple named Michael and Sarah living in the suburbs of Los Angeles. They have been married for 12 years, they share 2 children, a modest mortgage, and a standard portfolio of retirement accounts. They have reached the painful but mutual conclusion that their marriage is over. In a rational society, this transition would be treated as an administrative restructuring of a domestic partnership. But because they are operating within the traditional American family law system, they are about to step into a financial meat grinder. Believing they are doing the responsible thing, Michael and Sarah each retain a traditional family law attorney. They are each asked to put down a $10,000 initial retainer. Within the first 30 days, before a single substantive negotiation has taken place regarding their children or their assets, those retainers are severely depleted. How does this happen? It happens through the insidious mechanics of the billable hour and manufactured adversarial positioning. Every communication exchanged between the opposing counsels, every 15-minute phone call to clarify a minor detail, and every standard procedural document filed with the court is billed in 6-minute increments at rates exceeding $400 an hour. The traditional system is structurally designed to incentivize friction and penalize efficiency. When Michael retains his attorney, that attorney sends a standard discovery request demanding 10 years of bank statements, tax returns, and credit card bills. Sarah is then billed by her attorney to review the request, billed to discuss the request, billed to gather the documents, and billed to draft the formal legal response. Michael is simultaneously being billed by his attorney to review those exact same documents. This is the traditional litigation trap. a highly polished echo chamber of wealth extraction that thrives on creating problems to solve. By the time Michael and Sarah realize that their amicable separation has been engineered into a hostile legal battle, their combined legal fees have surpassed $40,000. This money, which could have been utilized for their children to attend college or to secure separate housing, has vanished into the overhead of two law firms. This scenario is not an anomaly. It has been the dominant historical trend destroying the American middle class over the past 4 decades. Now imagine if Michael and Sarah had access to the exact knowledge that is fueling the current cultural rebellion against this establishment system. Imagine if they understood that the state fundamentally allows individuals to represent themselves and submit their own stipulated judgments without ever stepping foot inside a courtroom. This is where the structural genius of alternative legal models and specialized document preparation frameworks comes into play. The American public in 2026 is experiencing a profound awakening regarding procedural decoupling. Procedural decoupling is the realization that personalized legal strategy and legal administration are two entirely separate services. You might need intensive legal strategy if you are fighting over a complex multinational business valuation, but if you are simply dividing a standard income, dividing a 401k, and selling a suburban home, you do not need a gladiator. You need a highly competent administrator. Services that have emerged in this space operate on a flat-fee, transparent model. They do not represent one party against the other. Instead, they act as a neutral third-party entity dedicated entirely to procedural compliance, mathematical accuracy, and document preparation. The primary hurdle in an uncontested divorce is not the law itself. It is the bureaucracy. The modern family court system is a labyrinth of highly specific forms, mandatory financial disclosures, and strict procedural timelines. A single missing signature on an income and expense declaration, or an improperly formatted marital settlement agreement, will result in the court clerk rejecting the entire judgment packet. Traditional law firms use this bureaucratic complexity to justify their exorbitant retainers, convincing the public that navigating the paperwork requires an advanced legal degree. The cultural evolution we are witnessing today is the total demystification of this paperwork. Consumers are taking control of the negotiation phase at their own kitchen table. Michael and Sarah decide who keeps the house, how they will split the retirement accounts, and what their specific holiday custody schedule will look like. Once that mutual agreement is reached, they bring the raw data to a specialized paralegal or document preparation service. This service then translates their kitchen table agreement into the precise legal vernacular and specific forms required by the state court system. These specialized administrators ensure that every statutory requirement for child support calculations is met using the state guidelines. They ensure that all preliminary and final declarations of disclosure are properly served, executed, and filed with the court, preventing future litigation over hidden assets. They ensure that the final judgment packet is formatted exactly to the local presiding judge requirements. The potential outcomes of utilizing this neutral, administrative pathway are staggering. We are looking at a reduction in divorce costs by up to 90% in some case studies. But the financial savings are only one part of the equation. The psychological preservation of the family unit is the true victory here. By removing the adversarial attorneys from the communication loop, parents are forced to communicate directly and establish the co-parenting dynamic that will govern the rest of their lives. The legal system historically punished this kind of autonomy. For decades, local bar associations held a terrifying monopoly on legal access, aggressively prosecuting any alternative service providers under the guise of unauthorized practice of law regulations. They created a massive cultural narrative that anyone attempting to navigate the legal system without a licensed attorney was foolish and in grave danger of losing their fundamental rights. However, the data tells an entirely different story today. By 2026, major metropolitan courts are reporting that in over 70% of all family law filings, at least one party is completely self-represented. The courts are absolutely inundated. The traditional system has priced itself completely out of existence for the average American family. The rise of specialized, unbundled legal document assistance is not just a clever business model. It is an absolute necessity born from the collapse of traditional legal accessibility. But as this self-representation movement accelerates and billions of dollars begin draining out of the traditional litigation economy, the legal establishment is not simply walking away. A massive hidden war is currently being waged behind the closed doors of state legislatures and judicial committees. The legal elite are deploying complex regulatory strategies to crush these affordable alternatives and force the American public back into the retainer trap. And if you think your mutual agreement is safe simply because you both signed it on the dotted line, you have absolutely no idea the hidden administrative traps the court system has laid to reject your autonomy. What exactly are these institutional roadblocks, and how are the architects of the new legal rebellion systematically dismantling them to keep you out of court entirely? The mechanisms of this counterattack are chilling, and the exact strategies required to bypass them are what we must uncover next. To understand how the establishment strikes back, we have to examine the subtle weaponization of bureaucracy. The legal elite did not respond to the cultural shift toward self-representation by making it overtly illegal. Doing so would be a blatant violation of constitutional rights to access the courts. Instead, they made it administratively agonizing. They erected an invisible wall constructed entirely of complex, hyperlocal procedural rules, contradictory filing instructions, and an ever-changing labyrinth of mandatory state forms. State bar associations, which are fundamentally trade organizations designed to protect the economic interests of their members, hold massive influence over the administrative procedures of family courts. Through this influence, the definition of what constitutes the unauthorized practice of law has been stretched to draconian limits. Court clerks, who are the gatekeepers of the judicial system, are strictly forbidden from providing anything that could be construed as legal advice. However, in practice, this directive is frequently weaponized as a refusal to provide even the most basic procedural guidance. If a self-represented individual asks a clerk which specific box to check on a dense, multi-page jurisdictional form, the clerk will abruptly end the conversation, citing unauthorized practice of law statutes, and advise the individual to hire an attorney. This is not an accident. It is a highly effective, systemic filtration mechanism designed to manufacture frustration and force compliance with the traditional retainer model. Let us look at a practical reality unfolding across the United States in 2026. Imagine a couple, Jessica and Robert, navigating a divorce in a major metropolitan county. They are completely aligned. They have drafted a comprehensive kitchen table agreement outlining exactly how they will divide their assets and share custody of their daughter. They refuse to pay litigators, so they download the state-mandated forms, fill them out to the best of their ability, and submit their initial petition. 30 days later, they receive their first rejection notice. The notice does not explicitly tell them how to fix the error. It vaguely references a failure to comply with Local Rule 5.14 regarding the formatting of the child support attachment. They guess at the correction, reprint the packet, and file again. 60 days later, a second rejection arrives in the mail. This time, the judgment is kicked back because their drafted language regarding the division of a specific retirement account did not include the exact, proprietary statutory language required by the specific judge assigned to their case. With every single rejection, months of time are lost. The psychological toll begins to mount. Jessica and her husband are trapped in a state of legal purgatory, unable to finalize their separation, unable to refinance their home, and unable to legally move forward with their lives. The system is intentionally bleeding them of their resolve. Historical trends indicate that this exact phase, the clerk rejection loop, is where the vast majority of self-represented individuals surrender. Exhausted, terrified of making a permanent mistake, and overwhelmed by the administrative hostility, they finally break down and write a $10,000 check to a local law firm simply to get the paperwork pushed through the system. The invisible wall does exactly what it was engineered to do. This is precisely where the modern, specialized document preparation framework entirely bypasses the establishment trap. Services operating under the streamlined administrative model do not rely on guesswork, and they do not attempt to navigate the system using the public-facing instructions, which are often intentionally vague or outdated. Instead, these entities operate as highly specialized legal cartographers. Because they process hundreds, sometimes thousands, of filings within specific jurisdictions, they possess a massive database of institutional knowledge regarding the exact, unwritten preferences of individual court clerks and presiding judges. When a couple like Jessica and Robert utilize a flat-fee procedural administrator, the entire dynamic shifts. The administrator knows that Judge Smith in Department 41 requires a specific waiver of final disclosure to be printed on a separate page, even though the state form allows it to be checked as a single box. They know that the local child support agency requires a hyper-specific addendum regarding daycare expenses that is not mentioned anywhere in the standard public filing packet. The strategy here is procedural perfection. By utilizing advanced, automated document assembly software paired with deep jurisdictional expertise, these alternative models generate judgment packets that are structurally flawless. They act as a buffer between the American public and the hostile bureaucracy of the family court. They handle the complex mathematics of the state guideline support calculators, ensuring that the net disposable income figures are perfectly aligned with the submitted income and expense declarations. They manage the strict timeline of the service of process, ensuring that the correct sequence of filing the petition, serving the summons, and filing the proof of service is executed without a single deviation. They meticulously track the mandatory waiting periods, which vary wildly from state to state, ensuring that default judgments or uncontested stipulations are filed on the exact day jurisdiction allows. In 2026, case studies analyzing court efficiency show that standard unassisted pro-per filings face a rejection rate hovering around 65% on their first attempt. Conversely, filings managed by specialized, dedicated procedural administrators boast acceptance rates exceeding 95% on the initial submission. This data point alone represents millions of hours of saved time and tens of millions of dollars kept out of the hands of traditional law firms. The establishment is fully aware of this massive discrepancy. The realization that the American public can successfully achieve legal finality without paying the litigation toll has triggered widespread panic within traditional family law circles. In response, some jurisdictions have attempted to quietly alter local filing rules overnight, implementing obscure cover sheet requirements or changing electronic filing portal protocols without public notice, hoping to catch these alternative services off guard and drive up their rejection rates. But the unbundled, consumer-first legal model has proven to be incredibly agile, constantly adapting its proprietary software to instantly reflect these minor bureaucratic hurdles. The cultural evolution has reached a point of critical mass. The public now fundamentally understands that they do not need to finance a war to achieve a peace. However, a critical question remains unanswered in this paradigm shift. It is one thing to successfully navigate the paperwork for a standard suburban household with a predictable W-2 income and a single piece of real estate. But the American financial landscape is becoming exponentially more complex. We are entering an era where the average marital estate is far more convoluted than it was even a decade ago. How exactly does this unbundled, non-adversarial model function when the stakes are dramatically raised? What happens when Jessica and Robert are not just dividing a house, but are attempting to decouple a portfolio that includes restricted stock units, complex decentralized cryptocurrency holdings, or a small business with fluctuating valuations? The traditional legal narrative insists that the moment these complex assets are introduced, you absolutely must return to the litigator model, retain opposing forensic accountants, and prepare for a multi-year financial war. But the architects of this cultural evolution have developed an entirely new, stealthy approach to dismantling even the most complex financial empires without ever stepping foot inside a courtroom. The mechanisms they use to neutralize high asset volatility are brilliant, counterintuitive, and completely bypass the traditional discovery process. The exact methods they use to quietly untangle these modern financial webs are what we are going to expose next. The traditional legal system operates on a foundation of deep-seated mistrust. In a conventional litigated divorce, the discovery process is essentially a state-sanctioned financial audit, where both parties are treated as potential criminals hiding assets in the shadows. Attorneys thrive in this environment because every subpoena, every deposition, and every formal request for production of documents represents a billable event. By 2026, the historical trends show that the discovery phase alone can consume up to 40% of a total legal budget. But the cultural evolution we are analyzing, championed by administrative models like the Divorce 661 framework, posits a radical alternative: the Voluntary Disclosure Pact. This is the understanding that if two people have shared a life and a bank account for a decade, they already possess the keys to their financial kingdom. The need for a third-party investigator is often a manufactured necessity designed to escalate costs. To see how this works with high-stakes assets, imagine a couple in late 2026 named David and Elena. David is a senior software architect at a major cloud computing firm, and his compensation is heavily weighted in restricted stock units, or RSUs. These are not simple cash bonuses. They are complex financial instruments that vest over a 4-year period based on continued employment. Elena is a successful consultant who has diversified their marital savings into a variety of decentralized finance protocols and staked Ethereum. In the old world, a traditional lawyer would see this portfolio and immediately call for a forensic accountant. They would argue that David might be lowballing the future value of the stock, or that Elena is hiding a cold storage wallet. This creates an immediate defensive posture, leading to tens of thousands of dollars in expert witness fees before they even discuss who gets the couch. The modern administrative model handles this with a surgical data-driven approach known as the time rule. Instead of fighting over the potential future value of David's RSUs, the neutral facilitator uses established mathematical formulas to determine the community property interest. In many jurisdictions, this involves calculating the ratio of the time David worked for the company during the marriage versus the total time required for the stocks to vest. For example, if David was granted 1,000 shares 2 years before the divorce filing, and they vest 2 years after the filing, the formula dictates a 50-50 split of the community portion. There is no need for a legal argument when you have a spreadsheet and a calendar. By utilizing a document preparation service that understands these specific formulas, David and Elena can reach a settlement that is mathematically indisputable and legally binding without paying 2 lawyers to argue over basic arithmetic. This brings us to the even more complex world of digital assets in 2026. Cryptocurrency and NFTs have become standard fixtures in the American marital estate, and they are frequently used as leverage in high-conflict divorces. Traditional law firms often struggle with the technical nuances of blockchain technology, leading to prolonged and expensive education at the client's expense. The cultural shift toward administrative dissolution leverages the transparent nature of the blockchain itself. Instead of subpoenas, the parties provide public wallet addresses. The facilitator then uses on-chain analysis tools to verify the transaction history and current balances. This is the ultimate neutral arbiter. The code does not lie, and it does not charge a $400 an hour retainer. Case studies from 2025 and 2026 indicate that when couples agree to a transparent, neutral verification process for digital assets, the time to reach a final settlement is reduced by an average of 6 months. Furthermore, we must address the issue of the family business. Imagine if Elena's consulting firm had physical assets, employees, and a brand valuation. In a litigated scenario, a business valuation expert would be hired by each side. One would argue the business is worth $500,000 to keep the buyout low, while the other would argue it is worth $2 million to maximize the settlement. This is the definition of the litigation trap. The 661 model advocates for the neutral appraisal strategy. The couple agrees to hire a single, joint appraiser whose findings are accepted as the baseline for the settlement. This eliminates the adversarial bias and cuts the cost of valuation in half instantly. But the real magic of this cultural evolution lies in the concept of the equitable offset. This is a strategic move that avoids the forced liquidation of assets. In a traditional divorce, the court might order the sale of the family home to split the equity, or force the sale of a business to pay out a spouse. This is often a lose-lose scenario that destroys the underlying value of the assets. In the modern administrative framework, the focus is on a holistic trade. If the family home has $500,000 in equity, and David's unvested RSUs and crypto holdings are valued at roughly the same amount, the couple can execute an offset. Elena keeps the house and the stability it provides for the children, while David keeps his stocks and his digital portfolio. The total marital pot is divided equally in value, but the individual assets remain intact and productive. This level of sophisticated financial decoupling requires a level of cooperation that the traditional legal system is simply not built to handle. The litigation model relies on the concept of winning and losing. If one person keeps the house, the other feels they have lost the territory. If one person keeps the business, the other feels they have lost the future income. The administrative model reframes the entire conversation around the preservation of wealth. By avoiding the massive fees associated with forensic accounting and contested valuations, there is actually more money left on the table for both parties to divide. It is a mathematical reality that a 90% share of a $100,000 pot is less than a 50% share of a $200,000 pot that hasn't been drained by legal fees. However, even with a perfect financial agreement and a transparent disclosure process, there is a final massive obstacle that stops thousands of American divorces in their tracks every year. It is the silent killer of the uncontested divorce, the technical rejection of the judgment packet. You can have a signed agreement, you can have your assets perfectly divided, and you can have your crypto verified on the blockchain, but if your marital settlement agreement does not contain the specific mandatory language regarding the reservation of jurisdiction or the specific statutory warnings required for child support, the court will treat your paperwork like trash. This is the bureaucratic minefield where the legal establishment waits to reclaim its lost revenue. The specific step-by-step requirements for a bulletproof judgment are so exacting that even seasoned attorneys frequently fail to get them right on the first try. So, how does the new breed of legal document assistance ensure a 100% success rate when the system is literally designed to find an excuse to say no? The secret lies in a series of hidden procedural checkpoints and specific formatting hacks that most people don't even know exist. We are about to pull back the curtain on the exact anatomy of a rejected judgment and show you the precise corrections that turn a legal failure into a finalized decree of dissolution. If you think your paperwork is ready for the judge's signature, you are likely missing one of the 5 critical elements we are about to deconstruct. The first critical element that triggers automatic rejection in the family court system is the failure to establish absolute jurisdictional supremacy. You might assume that because you pay taxes in a specific county, the local courthouse automatically has the authority to dissolve your marriage. This is a fatal assumption. In the year 2026, state courts are heavily monitoring interstate and inter-county migration patterns. The legal concept is known as subject matter jurisdiction, and it requires precise chronological pleading. Imagine a couple, Thomas and Lisa, who recently moved to Austin, Texas, or perhaps a county in Southern California, seeking to utilize an administrative divorce model. They have their agreement perfectly drafted. However, their initial petition fails to explicitly state that at least one of them has resided in the state for the mandatory statutory period, often 6 months, and in the specific filing county for 3 months prior to the exact date the petition was date-stamped. If the dates on the petition reflect a residency of 5 months and 29 days, the clerk will reject the entire judgment packet months later. The modern procedural administrator bypasses this by meticulously calculating jurisdictional timelines before a single document is drafted, ensuring the court's authority is mathematically indisputable. The second hidden trap involves the mandatory financial disclosure loop. The traditional litigation system uses discovery to rack up billable hours, but the state still requires a baseline level of transparency, even in a completely amicable, unbundled divorce. This is achieved through preliminary and final declarations of disclosure. The most common point of failure for self-represented individuals is the assumption that because they agree on everything, they can simply skip the formal exchange of financial documents. The court views this as a massive red flag for potential fraud or coercion. If your final judgment packet does not contain a formally executed declaration regarding service of declaration of disclosure, the judge cannot legally sign your decree. Furthermore, if you and your spouse choose to waive the final disclosure to save time, a highly common practice in administrative divorces, that waiver must contain incredibly specific statutory language. It must explicitly state that both parties have completed preliminary disclosures, that they fully understand their rights to a final disclosure, and that they knowingly and voluntarily stipulate to waive that right. If a single required sentence is omitted from this waiver, the clerk will bounce the entire file, sending you back to the very beginning of the administrative queue. This brings us to the third and perhaps most rigid element, the uncompromising mandates surrounding child support and the state's inherent jurisdiction over minors. Let us look at a case study from early 2026 involving Marcus and Chloe. They have agreed to a 50-50 physical custody split of their 2 children. Because they earn roughly the same annual income, they agree at their kitchen table that neither party will pay child support to the other. They write a simple sentence in their marital settlement agreement stating child support is set to 0, sign it, and file it. The judgment is immediately rejected. Why? Because under the legal doctrine of parens patri, the state considers itself the ultimate protector of children. You cannot simply opt out of state child support guidelines without proving to the court that the children will not become a financial burden on the state welfare system. To legally achieve a $0 child support order, your paperwork must include a formal computerized guideline calculation printout, attached as an exhibit. Moreover, it must contain a mandatory non-guideline child support declaration. This declaration must affirmatively state that both parents are fully informed of their statutory rights, that the agreed-upon amount will adequately meet the needs of the children, and most importantly, that neither parent is currently receiving public assistance. Specialized document preparation services utilize the exact same calculation software as the family court judges, ensuring that these non-guideline stipulations are structurally bulletproof and instantly approved. The fourth critical element is the precise termination of spousal support jurisdiction. This is where millions of dollars of future liability hang in the balance. In a long-term marriage, typically defined as exceeding 10 years, the court heavily resists terminating its power to award alimony. If your settlement agreement simply says neither party wants spousal support today, the court will likely reserve jurisdiction, meaning your ex-spouse could legally petition the court for financial support 5, 10, or 15 years in the future if their economic circumstances change. To permanently close this door and achieve true financial decoupling, the judgment must contain explicit, irrevocable termination language. It must state that the court's jurisdiction to award spousal support to either party is terminated forever, and that no court shall have the power to modify this order regardless of any unforeseen future circumstances. The wording must be absolute, citing the specific state family codes that govern the waiver of future rights. This is the exact level of precision that separates a temporary truce from a permanent legal dissolution, and it is a nuance that standard internet templates routinely fail to provide. The fifth and final element involves the sheer mechanical formatting and assembly of the judgment packet itself. By 2026, the digitization of the court system has created a rigid electronic bureaucracy. Courts require specific metadata tagging on PDF uploads, exact margins for judicial stamps, and a hyper-specific ordering of the documents. The judgment checklist often requires the judgment form, followed by the marital settlement agreement, followed by the child custody attachment, the child support attachment, the spousal support attachment, and finally the property division attachment. If the signature pages are detached from the substantive agreements, or if a required notary acknowledgement on a real estate transfer document is missing its corresponding seal, the automated filing portals will trigger a rejection code. Document preparation services acting within this cultural evolution operate like industrial assembly lines in this regard. They do not submit paperwork. They submit meticulously engineered data packets designed to glide through the clerk's review process without triggering a single physical or digital anomaly. When all 5 of these elements are perfectly aligned, the administrative divorce is executed with breathtaking efficiency. The American public is slowly waking up to the reality that they can successfully dismantle a marriage contract using data, mathematics, and procedural perfection instead of litigation, anger, and emotional destruction. But as hundreds of thousands of couples in 2026 successfully transition out of the traditional court system, a new and entirely unexpected phenomenon is emerging. The legal establishment, realizing they can no longer force people into court using bureaucratic red tape, has pivoted their strategy entirely. They have launched a massive coordinated psychological campaign aimed directly at the American public. They are no longer fighting the paperwork, they are fighting the very concept of the amicable divorce itself. How exactly is the traditional divorce industry attempting to convince society that avoiding conflict is actually dangerous? And what are the psychological tactics they are using to lure couples back into the arena of high-conflict litigation? The answer involves a dark manipulation of human emotion and fear that we must immediately deconstruct. The legal establishment in 2026 has mastered a technique known as cognitive dissonance engineering to pull couples back into the high-conflict litigation cycle. This is a deliberate, highly sophisticated psychological strategy designed to transform mutual cooperation into systemic paranoia. The foundation of this strategy rests on a single powerful human impulse, the fear of being a sucker. When a couple decides to use a streamlined administrative model, they are making a rational, data-driven decision. However, the litigation-based law firm marketing machine is designed to bypass the rational brain and trigger the primal fight-or-flight response. This is often achieved through what industry insiders call fiduciary gaslighting. To understand how this functions in the real world of 2026, imagine a character named Sarah. Sarah and her husband have been using a specialized document preparation service to finalize their dissolution. They have already agreed on a fair division of their equity and a collaborative parenting plan. But one afternoon, Sarah sees a targeted advertisement on her social media feed from a local boutique family law firm. The ad does not talk about law, it talks about protection. It asks a series of pointed, destabilizing questions. Do you really know where all the money is? Are you sure your spouse is being honest about their offshore accounts or their cryptocurrency holdings? Are you leaving your children's future on the table just to save a few dollars today? This is the beginning of the consultation trap. Sarah, feeling a sudden surge of anxiety, schedules a free initial consultation. The attorney she meets with is a master of the what-if scenario. They do not tell Sarah that her agreement is wrong. Instead, they frame their intervention as an act of professional due diligence. They explain that historical trends in high-asset jurisdictions suggest that up to 30% of self-represented individuals inadvertently overlook significant community property interests. They introduce the concept of the hidden financial tail. They suggest that by signing a kitchen table agreement, Sarah might be waiving her right to future support that could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars if her husband's career trajectory continues upward. This leads to the second psychological tactic, the weaponization of rights. In the traditional legal narrative, the concept of a relationship is replaced by the concept of a portfolio of rights. The lawyer begins to categorize every aspect of Sarah's life as a legal entitlement that must be fiercely defended. Cooperation is reframed as a weakness. Compromise is reframed as a loss. The attorney uses a step-by-step process to dismantle Sarah's confidence in her own judgment. First, they cast doubt on the financial data. Second, they highlight obscure, low-probability risks and present them as imminent threats. Third, they present the litigation model not as a choice for war, but as the only responsible way to ensure a secure future. By the end of the 30-minute meeting, the psychological damage is done. Sarah, who walked into the office feeling peaceful and resolved, leaves feeling like a victim who has been nearly cheated. The open communication she had with her husband is now poisoned by the suspicion that he has been manipulating her. When she goes home, she no longer sees a partner she is parting ways with. She sees an adversary who might be hiding something. This is how the litigation industry regenerates its own demand. They don't find conflict. They manufacture it by exploiting the inherent vulnerability of the transition. We can see this play out in a massive case study from early 2026 involving a couple in the tech sector, Jason and Emily. They had $1 million marital estate comprised of home equity and unvested stock options. They were 80% through a neutral administrative process when Emily was convinced by a litigator that she needed a comprehensive forensic audit. The lawyer promised no specific outcome, but highlighted the potential outcome of discovering an extra $50,000 in commingled assets. This triggered Jason to hire his own aggressive litigator in self-defense. The resulting war of attrition lasted 14 months. They spent a combined $220,000 on legal fees and expert witnesses to fight over a disputed $25,000 inheritance. The financial outcome was a net loss for both parties, but the psychological outcome was even more devastating: the total collapse of their co-parenting relationship and a decade of future resentment. Another layer of this psychological warfare is the complexity gaslighting regarding retirement accounts and the Qualified Domestic Relations Order, or QDRO. The traditional system has convinced the American public that dividing a 401k or a pension is a task of such extreme technical difficulty that only a high-priced legal team can navigate it. In reality, the division of retirement assets is a standard administrative procedure that follows rigid federal and state guidelines. Specialized document assistants and QDRO preparation firms handle these daily for a fraction of the cost. Yet, the fear-based marketing continues to suggest that one small error in a QDRO could result in the total forfeiture of a person's retirement security. This creates a state of paralysis in the consumer, making them feel that the only safe path is the most expensive one. The legal establishment also leverages the concept of the best interests of the child to trigger parental guilt. They suggest that an amicable 50-50 custody split might not be enough protection for the child's future. They hint that unless a parent secures a highly specific, litigation-tested custody order with 100 pages of restrictive clauses, they are failing in their parental duties. This is a direct attack on the collaborative parenting model. It encourages parents to view time with their children as a zero-sum game of minutes and hours, rather than a fluid, evolving relationship. The cultural evolution of 2026 is currently at a tipping point between these two worlds. On one side, you have the emerging model of radical transparency, administrative efficiency, and the preservation of wealth. On the other, you have the legacy system of institutionalized conflict, billable hour extraction, and manufactured fear. The battle is not just over paperwork. It is over the very narrative of what it means to end a marriage in America. The most successful families of 2026 are those who recognize these psychological traps and realize that the most expensive advice is often the most destructive. They understand that the litigation-first approach is a relic of a time when information was scarce, and the legal elite held a total monopoly on procedural knowledge. As we continue this deep dive, we must look at what happens when the legal establishment realizes that psychological warfare is failing. As more Americans become immune to the fear-based marketing and continue to choose administrative pathways like the Divorce 661 model, the traditional firms are resorting to a much more dangerous strategy. They are moving into the realm of shadow litigation. This is a world where attorneys operate in the background of supposedly uncontested divorces, quietly sabotaging agreements from the inside to force a return to the courtroom. How do you spot a shadow litigator before they blow up your agreement? What are the specific red flags in a spouse's sudden change of behavior that indicate a third party is pulling the strings? The answer lies in the subtle shift from interest-based negotiation to position-based demands, and the specific phrases that are the calling cards of the litigation saboteur. We are about to reveal the exact playbook of the shadow litigator, so you can see the strings before they pull you under. The shadow litigator is a ghost in the machine of the modern administrative divorce. By 2026, a specific business model has matured within the legal industry, known as the ghostwriting or advisory retainer. Unlike a traditional attorney of record who files a notice of appearance with the court and takes public responsibility for the case, the shadow litigator remains entirely invisible to the other spouse and the court system. They operate in the background, coaching one party on how to effectively sabotage an amicable agreement while maintaining the facade of cooperation. The historical trends leading to this phenomenon are rooted in the legal industry's desperate need to recoup the revenue lost to self-represented models and specialized document services. When a couple chooses an administrative path, they are essentially taking the bread off the table of high-conflict law firms. The shadow litigator's objective is not to reach a settlement. It is to transform a flat-fee administrative process back into a billable hourly conflict. To understand the mechanics of this sabotage, we must look at a case study from mid-2026 involving a couple named Liam and Sophia. They had been utilizing a neutral document preparation service to finalize their dissolution. They were 90% of the way through the process. Their assets were mapped, their custody schedule was drafted, and they were just weeks away from submitting their final judgment packet. Then Sophia, feeling a flicker of the sucker's fear we discussed previously, retained a shadow litigator for a limited-scope advisory role. Immediately, the language of the divorce shifted. This is the first and most prominent calling card of the litigation saboteur. The sudden jarring transition from interest-based language to position-based jargon. In their previous communications, Liam and Sophia used interest-based language. They said things like, "I want to make sure the kids stay in their current school district," or "We need to find a way to split the home equity so we can both afford new places." This type of communication focuses on the underlying needs of the family. However, once the shadow litigator entered the frame, Sophia's texts and emails began to reflect a rigid, position-based stance. She stopped talking about the children's needs and started talking about her statutory entitlements. She began using phrases like fiduciary duty of disclosure, commingled separate property interests, and more Marsden calculations. These are not words that a layperson typically uses in a casual kitchen table negotiation. When you see a sudden influx of complex legal terminology in a spouse's communication, you are not talking to your spouse anymore. You are talking to their shadow. The shadow litigator's playbook involves a step-by-step process of manufactured friction. The first step is the request for redundant documentation. Imagine if Liam and Sophia had already exchanged 3 years of tax returns and bank statements, which is a standard requirement for an administrative divorce. The shadow litigator will tell Sophia that 3 years is insufficient, and that she must demand 7 years of records, including obscure documents like canceled checks or itemized credit card statements from closed accounts. There is no legitimate legal reason for this in an uncontested scenario, but the goal is to trigger a defensive reaction from Liam. When Liam refuses, citing that the information has already been provided, the shadow litigator tells Sophia that Liam is hiding something. This creates a feedback loop of suspicion that effectively halts the administrative progress. The second step in the playbook is the tactical rejection of the boilerplate. Every administrative agreement contains standard language regarding the waiver of certain rights to ensure the judgment is final and binding. The shadow litigator will pick a single inconsequential paragraph, perhaps a clause regarding the mediation of future disputes, and instruct their client to refuse to sign unless it is rewritten in a way that is intentionally inflammatory or legally lopsided. This is known as a poison pill. The goal is to make the administrative paperwork feel unsafe and incomplete. By 2026, historical trends show that once a shadow litigator introduces a poison pill, the time to reach a final signature increases by an average of 400%, often leading one party to give up on the administrative model and hire their own litigator in frustration. We must also analyze the psychological script the shadow litigator gives to their client. They use a technique called the advocacy of the extreme. They tell the spouse that they are not being aggressive. They are simply being thorough. They use phrases like, "I am just protecting you," and if he has nothing to hide, he won't mind providing these extra documents. This allows the spouse to maintain a self-image of being a good, cooperative person while simultaneously acting as an agent of escalation. The shadow litigator effectively weaponizes the spouse's desire for security. In the case of Liam and Sophia, this resulted in a 6-month stalemate over a single $5,000 credit card debt that had already been paid off, resulting in $12,000 in new legal fees for Sophia's advisor. Another red flag of shadow litigation is the sudden hard stop on a previously agreed-upon term. Imagine if Liam and Sophia had already agreed that Liam would keep his retirement account and Sophia would keep the house equity. Out of nowhere, Sophia sends a message saying, "I've been advised that I might have a community interest in the premarital portion of your 401k, and I can't sign the agreement until we hire an expert to do a tracing." This is a classic move. It takes a resolved issue and reopens it using the threat of a forensic expert. The shadow litigator knows that the mere mention of a forensic expert is often enough to make the other spouse panic and offer a larger settlement just to avoid the cost of the expert. It is a form of legal extortion conducted through a proxy. The most dangerous aspect of the shadow litigator is that they have no skin in the game. Because they are not the attorney of record, they cannot be held accountable by the judge for the delays they cause. They can whisper in their client's ear, blow up an agreement, and watch from the sidelines as the family's savings are incinerated. By 2026, savvy consumers are learning to counter this by implementing a transparency protocol at the beginning of the administrative process. This protocol involves a mutual agreement that neither party will consult with outside counsel without disclosing the name of the attorney and the scope of the consultation to the other party. While this does not prevent shadow litigation, it brings the ghosts out of the shadows and into the light, where their influence can be neutralized through direct communication. As we look at the data from 2026, we see a clear divide. Families who successfully identify and neutralize the interference of shadow litigators are able to finalize their divorces for a fraction of the cost and maintain healthy co-parenting relationships. Families who succumb to the manufactured paranoia of the shadow advisor often find themselves in the very litigation trap they were trying to avoid. But the shadow litigator is just one part of a larger, final push by the legacy legal system to maintain its grip on American culture. There is a final, even more powerful force at play that determines whether a divorce is a peaceful transition or a total life collapse. It is the hidden influence of the state-mandated algorithms and the automated judicial review systems that are beginning to replace human judges. If you think a human being is deciding your fate in 2026, you are deeply mistaken. The rise of the algorithmic decree is the final frontier of the U.S. cultural evolution, and understanding how to code your agreement for the machine is the only way to ensure your freedom. We are about to look into the digital heart of the 2026 court system and show you exactly how the machines are now deciding the future of your family. By the time we reached the mid-2020s, the dream of having your day in court had largely been replaced by the reality of having your data in a server. In 2026, the American family court system has undergone a quiet but total digital transformation. We have moved beyond simple electronic filing into the era of the algorithmic decree. This is a system where the initial and often final review of your divorce judgment is not performed by a human judge or even a human clerk, but by a suite of sophisticated natural language processing algorithms designed to identify procedural anomalies with microscopic precision. The judicial system is no longer looking for justice in the abstract. It is looking for data integrity and statutory alignment. If you want to understand why your divorce is stuck in a pending status for 6 months, you have to stop thinking like a litigant and start thinking like a programmer. The heart of this digital gatekeeping is a process known as automated document triage. When an administrative service or a self-represented individual uploads a judgment packet to the court's portal, the system immediately runs an optical character recognition scan combined with a logic-based cross-referencing tool. This tool compares every figure in your marital settlement agreement against the figures in your preliminary declarations of disclosure and your child support guideline printouts. In the past, a human clerk might overlook a $50 discrepancy in a monthly utility expense between two different forms. In 2026, that $50 mismatch triggers an automatic flag. The machine does not see an amicable couple trying their best. It sees a data conflict that invalidates the entire submission. This is the first reason why the unbundled administrative model has become the only viable way to navigate the modern court. These services have built their own mirrored algorithms to pre-screen documents, ensuring that the data is perfectly synchronized before it ever touches a government server. Let us look at a case study involving a couple named Alexander and Maya. They are a high-earning couple in the fintech space, and by early 2026, they had reached a sophisticated agreement regarding their stock portfolios and their multi-state real estate holdings. They were using a traditional self-help approach, believing that their high level of education would allow them to navigate the forms. They submitted a 40-page settlement agreement that was legally sound and signed by both parties. However, the court's algorithm rejected it within 48 hours. The reason? The PDF metadata was improperly tagged, and their child support section did not use the exact Unicode-compatible table format required by the local jurisdiction's latest software update. The machine couldn't read the data, so the data didn't exist. Alexander and Maya were trapped in a loop of resubmission, not because their agreement was bad, but because their formatting was non-compliant with the machine's logic gates. This leads us to the concept of machine-readable law. In this cultural evolution, the language of the law is shifting from persuasive prose to functional code. Historical trends show that judges are increasingly relying on these algorithmic summaries to make their final rulings. When a judge opens your file, they are often looking at a dashboard generated by the AI that highlights potential outcomes based on current case law and statutory guidelines. If the AI flags your spousal support waiver as being outside the statistical norm for a marriage of your length, the judge is conditioned to question it, even if both parties are happy with the arrangement. To bypass this, you must know how to code the narrative of your divorce into the agreement. This involves using specific keywords and statutory citations that the algorithm is programmed to recognize as safe harbors. For example, instead of saying we both agree to no alimony, the document must state that the parties have engaged in a comprehensive review of the factors listed in the specific state family code and have made a knowing and intelligent waiver. This phrasing acts as a green light for the software, signaling that the mandatory legal requirements have been met. Step by step, the 2026 digital submission process looks like this. First, the data is aggregated into a centralized management system. Second, the financial figures are run through a guideline calculator that is natively integrated with the court's own API. Third, the settlement agreement is drafted using a modular template system where every paragraph is a pre-vetted legal block that has been tested against the court's current NLP triggers. Fourth, the documents are digitally signed using multi-factor authentication that meets the court's strict evidentiary standards. Finally, the packet is uploaded with the correct XML tagging so the court's computer can instantly categorize every asset and every debt. This is what models like the 661 framework have mastered. They are not just filling out forms, they are performing high-level data entry for the judicial branch. We must also address the rise of the algorithmic bias in family law. The machines are trained on historical data, which means they often reflect the biases of the past. If the data shows that in 90% of cases in a specific zip code, the primary breadwinner pays a certain percentage of their income in support, the machine will flag any agreement that deviates significantly from that mean. This is a massive challenge for couples who want to create a non-traditional or highly customized life after divorce. The system is pushing everyone toward a standardized average outcome. To break out of this standardization, your paperwork must include a specific section known as findings of fact to rebut the presumption. This is essentially an explanation written for the machine, providing the logical justification for why your specific agreement is fair even if it doesn't match the statistical average. Without this, the machine will continue to bounce your judgment as an outlier. The potential outcomes of failing to understand this digital heart of the system are severe. We are seeing a new form of legal inequality in 2026. On one side, you have those who can afford traditional litigators who charge thousands to fight the machine through motions and hearings. On the other, you have those who use outdated internet templates and find themselves permanently stuck in a cycle of administrative rejections, unable to ever reach a final decree. The middle ground, the successful ground, is occupied by those who use specialized administrative facilitators. These facilitators act as the technical translators who ensure that your human agreement is converted into a machine-approved judgment. They provide the interface between your domestic reality and the state's digital requirements. But as the court system becomes more automated and the administrative model becomes the standard for the American middle class, a new and much more profound question is beginning to surface. If the law is becoming a series of algorithms and the process is becoming a frictionless data exchange, what happens to the human element of the transition? We are moving toward a world where a marriage can be dissolved with the same speed and clinical efficiency as a software update. While this saves money and reduces conflict, it also creates a cultural vacuum. We are starting to see the emergence of a post-litigation society, where the lack of a formal adversarial ending is leading to a new kind of emotional lingering. People are finding that while their paperwork is finished, their lives feel unresolved. How is the 2026 cultural landscape evolving to fill this emotional gap? And what are the new rituals of decoupling that are replacing the courtroom drama? The next phase of this masterclass will explore the rise of the private settlement ceremony and the new industry of post-divorce integration that is emerging as the final piece of the U.S. cultural evolution. You have mastered the money and the machines, but are you prepared for the psychological reality of the automated exit? The answer lies in a burgeoning movement that is redefining the very concept of the American family unit. The movement currently reshaping the American landscape, often referred to in 2026 as the restructuring revolution, marks the definitive end of the broken home era. For over half a century, the United States viewed divorce through a lens of failure and fragmentation. If a marriage ended, the family was considered broken, and the primary objective of the legal system was to assign blame and distribute the remains of a collapsed life. But as we navigate through 2026, the cultural evolution has pivoted toward a model of family expansion rather than family dissolution. This shift is driven by a realization that the administrative efficiency provided by models like Divorce 661 is not just about saving money. It is about saving the social capital of the family unit. When a couple removes the adversarial legal layer, they are essentially opting into a new form of American kinship. To understand how this functions, let us examine a case study involving a character named James and his former partner Maria. Living in a high-density tech hub in 2026, they found themselves at the end of a 15-year marriage. In a 2010 context, their divorce would have likely involved 2 years of litigation, a public airing of grievances in a courtroom, and a scorched earth financial settlement that would have left both living in significantly diminished circumstances. However, in 2026, James and Maria utilized a process known as integration consulting. This is a burgeoning industry that has filled the vacuum left by the declining litigation model. Integration consultants are not lawyers. They are specialists in logistical and emotional architectural design. They work with couples who have already used an administrative document service to handle the legal filings, and their job is to build the physical and financial infrastructure of the new dual household family. The first step in James and Maria's integration process was the creation of a transition fund. Because they utilized a flat-fee document preparation service, they avoided the historical trend of spending an average of $40,000 on legal fees. In the 2026 economy, they redirected that $40,000 into a dedicated account designed to seed 2 separate residences. This is a critical data point. The capital that used to flow into the legal industrial complex is now being reinvested directly into the stability of the children. Step by step, the consultant helped them map out a synchronized household strategy. They used AI-driven software to ensure that both homes were equipped with identical technology, school supplies, and even clothing styles for their children. This minimized the transitional trauma for the kids, making the move between houses feel like a lateral shift rather than a move to a foreign territory. But the most profound element of this cultural evolution is the rise of the private settlement ceremony. By 2026, the sterile bureaucratic nature of the automated court system has led Americans to seek a more human form of closure. James and Maria did not receive their final decree via a cold email from a court clerk. Instead, they held a structured meeting with their integration consultant and a small circle of trusted family members. The ceremony involved the formal signing of the final administrative papers, followed by a joint statement to their children. This statement reframed the divorce not as an ending, but as an evolution. They explicitly stated that while the legal contract of marriage was being dissolved, the social contract of the family remained intact. This ritualistic closure provides the psychological finality that an algorithm cannot offer. It is the human software update that matches the legal hardware change. This shift has profound economic implications that we are only beginning to quantify in 2026. Historical trends suggest that high-conflict divorces lead to a significant drop in workplace productivity and a spike in healthcare costs due to stress-related illnesses. By contrast, the administrative low-conflict model is creating a more resilient workforce. Data from 2025 indicates that individuals who utilize unbundled legal services and integration consulting returned to their baseline productivity levels 3 times faster than those involved in traditional litigation. We are seeing the emergence of a decoupling economy, where services once focused on conflict are now focused on optimization. This includes everything from real estate agents who specialize in finding adjacent properties for co-parents to financial planners who design collaborative retirement portfolios that remain interconnected even after the legal split. We must also look at the role of AI in maintaining this new family structure. In 2026, the communication between James and Maria is moderated by a high-level co-parenting interface. This is not just a calendar, it is a behavioral analytics tool. If James drafts a message that contains aggressive or passive-aggressive language, the AI flags it and suggests a neutral alternative. This prevents the emotional flare-ups that historically led back to the courtroom. The system also handles the automated expense tracking for the children, instantly calculating the split for medical bills or extracurricular activities, and executing the bank transfers. This level of technical automation removes the friction points that were once the primary triggers for post-divorce litigation. The family is functioning as a decentralized organization, governed by a pre-agreed set of rules and managed by neutral technology. However, this transition toward a frictionless, administrative society is not without its critics. There is an emerging philosophical debate in 2026 regarding the desanctification of the marriage contract. Some cultural critics argue that by making divorce as easy as a software subscription cancellation, we are eroding the foundational commitment that holds society together. They point to data showing a slight increase in short-term marriages, suggesting that the lack of legal friction may be encouraging a more disposable view of relationships. But the proponents of the 661 model argue the opposite, that by removing the fear of a catastrophic exit, people are actually more likely to enter into partnerships with transparency and honesty. They argue that the high cost of traditional divorce acted as a barrier to freedom that kept people trapped in toxic and often dangerous situations. As we look at the landscape of the United States in the latter half of 2026, the blueprint for the modern family has been entirely redrawn. We are no longer a nation of nuclear families or broken homes. We are a nation of complex, interconnected networks of households that utilize technology and administrative precision to navigate the life cycle of relationships. The success of this model is evidenced by a marked decrease in juvenile court cases and a significant rise in the average savings rates for divorced individuals. We have successfully decoupled the emotional end of a relationship from the financial destruction of a family. But as this new American blueprint becomes the standard, a final and massive challenge is looming on the horizon. The legacy legal system, having lost the battle for the middle class, is now lobbying for a new set of regulations that could fundamentally change the tax implications of administrative divorces. They are attempting to introduce what is being called a family restructuring tax, a last-ditch effort to claw back the revenue they lost to the 661 movement. If this legislation passes, the cost of a peaceful exit could skyrocket overnight, not through legal fees, but through state-mandated penalties. How is the 661 movement preparing for this final legislative assault? And what can the average citizen do to protect their right to an affordable private dissolution? The final chapter of this cultural evolution is about to be written in the halls of power, and it will determine the fate of American family autonomy for the next 50 years. We are entering the final stage of the masterclass, where we reveal the ultimate strategy for securing your family's future against the coming regulatory storm. The final legislative assault of 2026 is manifesting as a complex piece of legislation known as the Domestic Stability and Oversight Act. To the casual observer, the name sounds protective, but for those who have studied the historical trends of the family law industrial complex, the intent is clear. It is a regulatory wall designed to remonopolize the dissolution process. The core of this proposed act is the introduction of a family restructuring tax, a mandatory surcharge on any divorce filing that does not involve at least one licensed attorney of record for each party. The justification used by the legal lobby is that self-represented individuals are a burden on the judicial infrastructure, and that this tax serves to offset the administrative costs of correcting their errors. However, when we analyze the data from the past 5 years, we see that the 661 model and other specialized document preparation services have actually decreased the court's administrative burden by submitting packets with a 95% first-time approval rating. Imagine a citizen named Daniel in late 2026. Daniel is a project manager who has spent months working with an administrative facilitator to ensure his divorce is handled with surgical precision. He and his spouse have agreed on every term, and they have utilized a flat fee model to preserve their savings for their children's future. Suddenly, Daniel is informed that because he chose not to spend $15,000 on a traditional legal retainer, the state wants to levy a $4,000 restructuring fee on his filing. This is the moment where the cultural evolution meets its greatest test. This is not just about a fee. It is about the state asserting that you do not have the right to resolve your private contracts without paying a toll to a specific professional guild. The strategy developed by the architects of the administrative movement to counter this is known as the preemptive certification protocol. To bypass the narrative that self-represented individuals are a risk to the system, 661 style services are moving toward a model where every document packet is accompanied by a certified administrative audit. This audit, performed by a third-party compliance officer, verifies that every signature is present, every math calculation is correct, and every statutory disclosure has been met. By presenting the court with a pre-certified, audit-backed packet, citizens like Daniel are effectively neutralizing the justification for the restructuring tax. They are proving that their private administrative process is actually more rigorous than the traditional litigation process. Historical trends suggest that when the public demonstrates this level of self-regulation, the pressure for draconian taxes often collapses under the weight of its own illogicality. But the 661 movement is going even deeper into the cultural fabric of the United States. We are seeing the rise of the Family Autonomy Pact, a document that couples are beginning to sign not at the end of their marriage, but at the beginning. This is a refined evolution of the prenuptial agreement. It is a set of administrative instructions that dictate exactly how the couple will decouple if the marriage ever reaches its natural conclusion. It explicitly rejects the litigation-first model and mandates the use of neutral document preparation services. By 2026, these pacts are being recognized by courts as binding procedural roadmaps. This is the ultimate defensive strategy. By deciding on the process while the relationship is healthy, couples are effectively locking the door against the shadow litigators and the manufactured conflict of the future. They are taking the most volatile moment of their lives and pre-packaging it into an administrative non-event. Case studies from the middle of 2026 show that families who have implemented these autonomy pacts have a nearly 100% success rate in avoiding the court system entirely. They move directly from the decision to separate to the submission of a stipulated judgment, often in as little as 60 days. The potential outcomes of this shift are a total restructuring of American generational wealth. We are talking about billions of dollars that were historically siphoned off into the legal economy being kept within the family unit. This money is then available for reinvestment into education, home equity, and small business development. The 661 model has transformed from a simple service into a tool for economic liberation. As we conclude this deep dive masterclass, we must look at the long-term historical perspective. The United States has spent the last century moving from a system of state-mandated marriage to a system of individual choice. We are now entering the final stage of that evolution, the system of individual resolution. The 661 movement is the vanguard of this new era. It is the realization that the law should be a tool for the people, not a trap for the unwary. It is the understanding that human relationships are too complex and too precious to be reduced to a zero-sum game played by adversarial attorneys. The future of the American family in 2026 and beyond is one of decentralization and autonomy. We are seeing the emergence of a society where the end of a marriage is treated with the same respect, efficiency, and administrative clarity as any other major life transition. The stigma of the broken home is being replaced by the reality of the restructured family. This is the true U.S. cultural evolution. The transition from a culture of conflict to a culture of compliance. From a culture of litigation to a culture of logic. But do not think for a moment that the battle is over. Even as the 661 model becomes the standard for millions, new challenges are emerging in the realm of international family law and the governance of multi-jurisdictional digital estates. As we move into 2027, the complexity of our lives will only increase. The digital footprints we leave behind, the global assets we accumulate, and the evolving nature of parental rights in a post-AI world will require an even more sophisticated set of administrative tools. The 661 framework is already adapting, developing new protocols for the international decoupling of assets and the management of multi-state custody arrangements that defy traditional geographic boundaries. If you have followed this masterclass from Part 1 to Part 10, you now possess a level of insight into the American legal and cultural landscape that very few people ever achieve. You understand the mechanics of the paperwork, the psychology of the traps, the digital heart of the court's algorithms, and the new rituals of human decoupling. You are no longer a spectator in the evolution of the American family. You are an informed participant. You have the knowledge to protect your assets, your children, and your peace of mind. The 661 movement is not just a service. It is a philosophy of empowerment. It is the belief that you are the best architect of your own future. As we look ahead, the questions we must ask are no longer about how to survive a divorce, but how to thrive after one. The landscape is shifting, the rules are changing, and the tools for your freedom are already in your hands. But what happens when these same administrative principles are applied to the very foundation of how we form relationships in the first place? What if the 661 model is actually the blueprint for a new type of social contract that could prevent the need for divorce altogether? The investigation into the pre-partnership administrative revolution is the next great frontier we must explore. The evolution never stops, and the next phase of our deep dive into the 2027 legal landscape will reveal a shift so radical it makes everything we've discussed today look like a mere rehearsal. Stay tuned as we prepare to deconstruct the future of the human contract itself.